Welcome to Viitorul Român Society event in collaboration with the Romanian Consulate in Los Angeles. This event marks Romanian Language Day, which was on August 31st. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. This is a momentous event, the translation of one of the greatest novels of Romanian literature, Craii de Curtea-Veche, and we are delighted to have tonight the translator, Dr. Sean Cotter, along with a few other distinguished guests. We have our very own Consul General in Los Angeles, Dr. Cosmin Dumitrescu. We have two prestigious writers, Bogdan Suceava and Adina Dabija. And also we have two video interventions from James Rosapepe and Ileana Orlich. And finally, we have amongst us Tudor Petrut, who's a Romanian-born actor, director, and writer living in California for more than 3 decades. Now, let me introduce myself. I'm Virgil Dumitrescu. I'm the cultural director of the Viitorul Român Society. I want to thank my board members for always supporting our activities. Adrian Barbu is our president. John Totoiu is our vice president, and we have quite a number of people in the committee and the board. Without further ado, let me try to start this meeting by asking our Consul General to say a few words.
Hello, Mr. Dumitrescu. I may quote from Napoleon, "Able was I ere I saw Elba." So that is a good paradigm. So first of all, thank you for having me here. I'm so honored and privileged to be together with such amazing and distinguished guests that you have now with us virtually. Not only the speakers, but also I've been able to see a lot of good friends attending and people that are interested in Romanian art and culture. I would really like to congratulate you personally for everything that you're doing and everything that you have done in order to have this event, and also all the members of the board and all the members of the Viitorul Român Society. You've been a great Romanian American organization for the last 90 years, more than 90 years, and you're doing a great job in promoting Romanian American cooperation in many fields, and you're doing that successfully. As a matter of fact, I consider to be a success also this event, even if we are at the beginning of our meeting. It's not only very well positioned in time for celebrating the day, the year day of the Romanian language. We marked on August 31st, but also for marking the 10 years, celebrating 10 years since the signing of the joint declaration for the 21st century of the strategic partnership between Romania and the United States in September, so 2011. It comes very well positioned, and it has a special significance from that point of view of enhancing and consolidating the Romanian-American strategic partnership. As you may know, many of you, we are very well engaged, myself and the Consulate General of Romania in Los Angeles, in consolidating especially two dimensions of the strategic partnership. I mean, the economic commercial dimension and the cultural academic one. And if at the beginning of the first half of this year, if we had together many events in which we promoted Romanian scientists from here, from the United States, but also from Europe, and especially from Romania, the last part of this year is dedicated to promoting Romanian culture and art. And this is only the first event in a series of very good, nice events that are to come in order to do that. You will see that we'll continue also tonight with the launching here of the Andrei Zinca's movie, but you will have the opportunity to attend and to participate in a series of online and in-person events that are to follow from now to the end of the year. And I publicly launch the invitation for you all to participate and enjoy. So as much as I would love to dive in and to make some criticism about the Rakes of the Old Court, or the Craii de Curtea-Veche, and about Mateiu Caragiale. Many of you know that that was my first university diploma in literature and languages. And I would really like to do that, but I see that we have amazing specialists and wonderful artists that are ready to make the comments, and I'm looking forward to hear their comments. I only want to point out that this cultural cooperation between Romania and the United States is very well embodied by Sean Cotter, and congratulations, Mr. Cotter, for what you've done with your career, but also with the translation of this amazing novel. The ones that read the novel, they know how much it means for the Romanian literature from the beginning of the 20th century, and its significance in the history of Romania, especially after the Great Union. And also they know what Mateiu Caragiale meant for the Romanian literature. We, the ones that made translations during our life, we know how difficult it is to translate the spirit of the writer and of the writing. I'm looking forward to see and to read your translation. The novel itself is very interesting, very Proustian. It shows the decadent society of the end of the 19th century in Bucharest, and the ones that read the other great novel of Mateiu Caragiale, the Remember, where he depicted the same life of Berlin, know how good Mateiu Caragiale was. Mateiu Caragiale was coming from a great family of the greatest playwright in Romania, and also a great intellectual. So I'm looking forward to hear the comments, and I will enjoy as much as any of you these comments that are to come. Thank you indeed very much for everything that you're doing, Viitorul Român Society, and Sean Cotter, for promoting Romanian culture, for promoting Romanian literature. Is probably the best art on the planet, because it shows the very heart of a people. Thank you, and best success.
Thank you, Consul Dumitrescu. Great thoughts. I also want to point out the help we got from Romanian Cultural Institute in New York in promoting this event, and I have to thank Dorian Brana for that. Thank you so much.
So I'd like to say that we are very, very happy to have been able to contribute to this event. I want to congratulate one more the organizers, but above all Sean for this this amazing achievement. I can't think of a bigger editorial achievement in the past years than the publication of this great book of Romanian literature. So definitely we'll be continuing to promote this book, and we are very happy that it receives raving reviews all over.
Now I will try to share a couple of videos from James Rosapepe and Ileana Orlich.
Bună seara. It's delightful to be with all of you this evening for a celebration of a very important event. Romanian literature is a gift to the world, but unfortunately, too many of us in the United States have not been able to access the gift because too many of us don't speak Romanian. And so this event, with this translation of this world-class novel, is a real breakthrough. And I applaud all those who've been involved in it, from the translator to the press to all the writers and academics and ordinary citizens and readers like myself who are participating this evening. I hope it's the first of a breakthrough for translations of Romania's wonderful literary heritage, and not the last. For the past couple of years, I've been the chair of Alianța, which, as some of you know, is the American organization promoting close alliance between the United States and Romania. And a big part of that's cultural. And what you're doing today, this evening, is a real contribution to strengthening that alliance, because many Romanians read English, as you know. Many fewer Americans speak Romanian. And so helping those of us who are linguistically challenged, Americans, access the great works of Romanian literature is a gift and a blessing. Congratulations.
Îmi face o deosebită plăcere să particip la această conversație, chiar și virtual. I am very happy to be part of this conversation, even though I'm far away, ironically, in Romania. The publication of Sean Cotter's translation of Mateiu Caragiale's novel is one of the most extraordinary events of my lifetime as an academic, as a professor of literature. I have been waiting for this masterpiece to be translated into English forever. It just seemed to be an impossible task. How would one translate a name like Pena Corcodușa? So it came as an extraordinary surprise, a great gift, this translation by Sean Cotter. A person I admire in a very special way and whom I have known for a very, very long time. We met many years ago. He had been in Romania with a Fulbright, and I was impressed at our first meeting with the fact that his Romanian was very good. It was accented, but the way, for instance, my English is accented. So it was clear that he was not a native speaker, but then his command of the language was impeccable. And I never thought at that time that I'm facing what, to my mind, is the most brilliant translator of Romanian literature into English that we have ever had. So I followed his academic trajectory through the academic ranks from assistant to associate to full professor, and was thrilled to see that his talent is appreciated and recognized. I have also been familiar with his teaching, with the content of his courses, and I was always impressed by his dedication to his students, to the profession, and at the same time to this métier of translating. I just never thought that Craii de Curtea-Veche would become a possibility. So here we are. I am delighted that for once in the comparative literature seminars, we can all use the text, this extraordinary poetic prose that foregrounds Byzantine portraits and a social milieu that takes us to the old court, that projects reality into some kind of aesthetic in what Ion Barbu, a great admirer of Mateiu Caragiale, called joc secund. So it is that filtering of realities through the aesthetic. It will be such an incredible treat to share this extraordinary work with the English readers everywhere, thanks to Sean Cotter. Once again, Sean, my heartfelt admiration, congratulations. It's an amazing, amazing job. Thank you very much for your time and for this opportunity to share some of my thoughts with everybody here now. Thank you.
I would like Bogdan and Adina to say a few words before we start the discussion with Sean.
Hi, everyone. So let me actually start with a toast. So allow me to toast in honor of the author, Mateiu Caragiale. He was the inspiration of my teenage years. So thank you for this unique gift to the world. To Sean Cotter, of course, what a delicate and attentive, careful translation. The publisher, of course, Northwestern World Classics. Congratulations, great choice, and thank you. To my friend, Bogdan Suceava, who helped this happen in many ways, and to the organizer, the Romanian consulate, and everyone present tonight. So congratulations to all. Today is a day of celebration, not only for the Romanian culture, but for anyone carrying the flag of some old court within, of an important legacy of honor, of chivalry, of sharing eternal values, which include honoring of the treasures of culture. So I know I do, for a very intimate perspective, as I began my writing career in Bucharest. And I do understand this labor of love of Sean from this intimate angle, because I too was lived by the mystery of Bucharest, which is not only a physical location as the capital of Romania, but a place for the soul to be worked out in so many threads and different connections that it makes there. It's an informational hub for the soul to be developed. So this is a place which blends within bits and fragments of many cultures: Greek, Turkish, French, Jewish, of course Roma, very colorful Roma, Austro-Hungarian, and others, which all contributed to what we call Romanian identity. And of course are the consequence of the richness of the Romanian language too, which challenged Sean, I'm sure. So I didn't live in Bucharest, but I was lived by these echoes of the past and by the demons of the place. And I'm sure anyone who lived there can connect to this inner truth of being lived by the place which is overpowering the individual, cooking the soul and purging it in this melting pot of vice and existential struggle. So with this, I would like to point one aspect that Mateiu Caragiale book brilliantly has revealed to me, but in a veiled form. It's not explicit. And this is maybe what makes this book relevant for the American reader, is that it takes a lot of strength and courage for an individual to not allow herself or himself to be overpowered by the enticing demons and customs of the place. And we can sense this tension between the individual and the society also in the New World, in the Americas, right? In a different way than at the gates of the Orient, where, as Mateiu puts it, nothing is taken seriously and the moral scale is upside down, as it happened in the interbellic area, times of the Romanian history, and not only. So in order to buffer this friction with the society that each of the characters of the novel lives in, they each create a bubble, a persona in a bohemian life, which sucks them in and is ultimately destroying their lives as they lose the alignment between the inner and the outer, allowing themselves to be starved in their inner life, losing peace, joy, and allowing these demons to take powers over them and decay. So one of the characters, Pashadia, admits he's a walking dead, his soul has died, and for another character of the novel, Patanzi, even the moral bankruptcy is a fraud. So as Sean beautifully translated, La Bohème, odious, unclean, La Bohème kills, and is more than a figure of speech. So maybe here we have, regardless of the culture, something important to reflect on, which is how to push this balance between the outer and the inner towards a rich inner life that in any given space and time cannot overpower and suck the life out of the individual. So one way showed by one of the characters is connected to this, connecting with this continuous flux of energy and inspiration coming from the ancestors, which is also can be seen as a soul attunement with the higher values. So thinking about his noble grandmother, Patansis confesses, later in life, he says, I was able to face moments of catastrophe solely through the aid of her memory. So it's the memory of his grandmother, this noble woman. In the chill of self-doubt at maltreatment, the image of her highness always appeared before me, tranquil, dressed in green, with green stones sparkling from head to foot. So you have this imprint in the soul that brings richness to the inner life. So before I allow Bogdan to take over, I want to leave you by wishing all of you to dwell and ponder means to dwell in the joys of a rich inner life and find strength in acts of attunement in your lineage, in your maybe soul lineage, to find courage and wisdom to honor these higher lineages, which are those of the soul. And also I want to congratulate Sean for his beautiful and very faithful translation. And I want to stress that allowing the words in the character's original language, be it Romanian, Turkish, or Greek, to flow in the text, opens for us the possibility, as readers that don't understand these languages, to see things not only with the eye of the mind, but also with our sense of musicality. It's just like a piece of music. So he says, I'm just going to give one example, which in one phrase you have 3 different words blended in English. He says, in a bright lit salon, elegant cucoanas decked with bijouterie and hooped malakoffs. So you have cucoana, you have the French word. So cucoana is originally from Greek. Bijouterie is French, of course, but we adopted it in Romanian. And malakoff is actually a Russian dish. So we have 3 different languages, and we can hear the musicality of these words blended in the translation, which is very beautiful. Also, another one is, I gave her a galben. And at the end of the book, he has this explanation of different expressions, which is also very useful. So I was looking some Latin expressions. I think it's very well organized, and it's beautiful. And the fact that you allowed Romanian language, as one of the characters puts it, it's in the book, it says, when she switched to Romania, the story took on a mystical light. So thank you all for being here tonight and coming to this mystical toast.
Yeah, thank you very much, Adina. And, thank you very much, Virgil, for inviting us tonight. My story, it's a little bit different. I have my thanks to extend to Northwestern University Press. I'd like to thank the representatives who are here tonight with us. Northwestern published over the last 3 decades quite a few of the important Romanian classics. Besides Mateiu Caragiale, there's also Gerul Naum. And what a coincidence. In a Northwestern book that was released a decade ago, I used a motto from Mateiu Caragiale. So, and I remember when I was presenting this book and talking about this, I had a series of events. A couple of times there was this question, who's this classic that we never heard about and you speak so highly? I mean, who's actually Mateiu Caragiale? And then I just realized that actually we are not alone. Every time when we talk about our work, when we talk about Romanian literature, we're actually coming from a tradition. We express this tradition, and this heritage is actually, with every opportunity, expressing what is beautiful, what we believe is beautiful. And in this context, Sean is making us a great favor because he translated several major books of Romanian culture. It was mentioned here, Nikita Stănescu's poetry, and now here we go, Rakes of the Old Court. And what we have here is a little jewel that's teaching us what is beautiful in a very particular way, because there are here two parts. First is the language. In Mateiu Caragiale's language, it's actually something that for many years, I believe it's impossible to translate. Now we have this version. This is a blessing. And then there is something more about it. There is the structure of the Rakes of the Old Court as a novel. And that's a discussion we should spend here like the whole night to discuss about it. I won't get into that. All I wanted to say, it's a big thank you, because now I finally feel next time when I'm going to be asked, where is this classic coming from? I can point to Sean Cotter's version, and I can say, you know what, please feel free to read.
So Sean, I think it's your turn now to take the stage and direct a little bit the battle. Tudor will help you exemplify your struggle or your success for this translation. Please take it over.
Oh, this has been so wonderful so far. I'll add my profound thanks to everybody who's organized this event, and the distinguished people that are here attending and also participating. I thought Adina and Bogdan's interventions were absolutely beautiful, and it's something that I share personally. Their appreciations of the way heritage and family work within Matei's text, or the way a tradition works for a writer, as Bogdan just said so powerfully. We are not alone. On a night like this, I also feel that I'm not alone. And that's something that all writers and translators feel as we work by ourselves at our computers. So often we feel isolated, but it's clear that we are not alone. And it's one of the great joys of my life that I'm allowed to participate in this Romanian version of family and this Romanian version of tradition. So thank everybody that's here, and it's been fantastic. Thank you. So I have two short passages to read from the text, and passages that will be familiar to some who've already seen it, including the book's editor, who is here. Anne is still here. I wanted to recognize Anne Gendler and thank her for her work on this text as well. The two short passages are from the beginning of the book, a description of the very first decadent evening that the characters spend together, and then a vignette that is from the past of Fantasy that is connected in a way that I'll explain to that first scene. So perhaps just to set the stage, since we have so many Romanian speakers here, perhaps if my colleague Tudor wouldn't mind reading the first Romanian passage, and then I'll read my first English passage, then we'll switch back to Romanian for the second passage, and then I'll read my English translation of that second passage. Does that sound agreeable, Tudor? Yes? Okay, so why don't you, you're on mute at the moment, but as soon as you come off mute, it's going to be great.
We can do it scene by scene, absolutely.
Okay, great. Yeah, so why don't you read the first scene, please? And thank you for your participation.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Era spre căderea iernii o vreme de lacrimi. Deși nu plouase, tot era ud. Jgheaburile plângeau, ramurile copacilor desfrunziți picurau, pe tulpine și pe grilaje se prelingeau ca o sudoare rece stropii groși. Ăsta e timpul care îndeamnă cel mai mult la băutură. Rarii trecători ce se prefirau prin ceață erau mai toți afumați. Un lungan, coborând prispa unei cârciumi, căzu grămadă și nu se mai sculă. Întorsei capul dezgustat. Birtul ales pentru acea seară, fiind tocmai în Covaci, luai o birjă, lucru cu minte, deoarece la sosirea mea, ceilalți mosafiri erau la a doua țuică, iar oaspetele la a treia. Mă arătai mirat că se înființase cu toții așa de vreme. Fantazii însă mă lămuri că el venise de-a dreptul de acasă, e al Pașadia, cu Pirgu, de-a dreptul și ei de la club. Vremea fiind prea urâtă ca să mai zăbovească la aperitive. Fantazii porunci încă un rând de țuici. Dar voia bună ce ne urarăm, ciocnind, lipsea cu totul. Mă temui să nu adorm iar. În sala unde grosolana petrecere negustorească pornise să se înfierbinte, era într-o sâmbătă, masa noastră avea aerul unui ospăț de înmormântare. Borșul cu smântână și ardei verde fu sorbit în tăcere. Niciunul din meseni nu ridica ochii din taler. Pirgu, îndeoseb, părea frământat de o mâhnire neagră. Aș fi deschis eu vorba dacă lăutarii n-ar fi început tocmai un vals care era una din slăbiciunile lui Fantazii. Un vals domol, voluptos și trist, aproape funebru. În legănarea lui molatică, pâlpâian, nostalgică și sumbră fără sfârșit, o patimă așa sfârșitoare că însăși plăcerea de a asculta era amestecată cu suferință. De îndată ce coardele încălușate pornițele să îngâime amara destăinuire, sub vraja adâncă a melodiei, întreaga sală amuțise. Tot mai învăluită, mai joasă, mai înceată, mărturisindu-i și dezamăgiri, rătăciri și chinuri, remușcări și căințe, cântarea, înnecată de dor, se îndepărta, se stingea, suspinând până la capăt pierdută o prea târzie și zadarnică chemare. Fantazii își șterse ochii umezi.
A night towards winter, an air of tears. Even though there had been no rain, everything was wet. The gutters wept, the branches stripped of leaves, dripped fat drops, running down trunks and window grills like a cold sweat. This was the season that drove one above all to the bottle. The few passers-by who drizzled through the fog were almost all drunk. One gangly boy, descending the steps of a bar, fell to the ground in a heap and did not move again. I turned my head in disgust. Since the establishment selected for this evening sat on Strada Covaci, I took a hansom. It proved to be the right choice, since on my arrival, the guests were already on their second round of Țuică, and he who guested us his third. I was surprised everyone had materialized so early. Fantazii explained he had come straight from home, while Pașadia and Pirgu from their club, the weather being too foul to dawdle over aperitifs. Fantazii pronounced another round of Țuică, but the good cheer we wished each other, glasses clinking, was nowhere apparent. I feared I would fall asleep again. In the hall where a grotesque banquet of merchants and traders began to warm up, it was a Saturday night. Our table felt more like a wake. The borscht, garnished with cream and hot pepper, was sipped in silence. None of those sharing table raised their eyes from their bowls. Pirgu especially seemed to suffer a dark humor. I would have started conversation if the musicians had not begun precisely that waltz for which Fantazii had a weakness. A slow, dragging waltz, voluptuous and sad, almost funereal. In its malicious oscillation, it traced a nostalgic and endlessly somber passion, one so rending that the very pleasure of listening to it became a kind of suffering. When the taut violin strings began to mimic a careworn confession, the entire hall in profound enchantment fell mute. Ever darker, lower, and slower, describing dolor and deception, wandering and pain, rue and regret, the song, suffocated in nostalgia, drifted away, withered into a whisper, to a lost, tardy, and pointless cry. Fantazii wiped his eyes. So that's the opening scene of the book. Later in the story, we have a flashback as many of you know who know the novel, we have a flashback where Pantazzi tells some parts of his upbringing. One of the stories he tells is of a love that he had with a woman named Wanda. And then the second passage is a short description of that part of the story. The reason why I chose that is because the waltz that we just heard described, and that description, by the way, is the only thing that Matei repeats almost word for word at the end of the novel. So it's a kind of a prized part of the book. That waltz that we heard described is a reference to an actual waltz from the period named Wanda. So that's why Pantazzi was crying when he heard the waltz. This is a detail that Cosmin Dumitrescu argues for in his book. So now perhaps we can move to the second passage, Tudor. Can we read the second?
Sure. And then this is a real challenge because this sounds even in Romanian. So I'm really curious how it worked out in English. So we're gonna listen very carefully.
Well, I've just realized listening to you the first time that there's actually two translators here tonight. You're a translator translating it into your performance. I'm the translator translating it into my English. So we're colleagues in this. We're on the same team.
Thank you. Mi-a trebuit vreme să mă reculeg. Aproape nu mă mișcam de acasă. Târziu am început să fac plimbări cărare afară din oraș. Cu prilejul acesta am băgat de seamă că la pod, la Marmizon, îmi ieșea mai totdeauna înainte cu o fată foarte frumoasă. De la un timp era un fel de grijă că n-aveam să o întâlnesc și dacă se întâmpla, așa că mi-era chiar ciudă. Pe nesimțite, plăcerea de la început îmi făcuse să o văd, a ajuns o nevoie și era din ce în ce mai amestecată cu duioșie. Ziua, noaptea, chipul ei îmi răsărea în tot ceasul înaintea ochilor. Nu mă puteam gândi la dânsa fără să nu mă tulbur. Iar când mă aflam în fața ei, mă cuprindea o sfială până atunci necunoscută, care m-a împiedicat îndelung să-i vorbesc. Ce îmi părea ciudat în toată istoria asta nu era că mă îndrăgostisem. Îmi venise și mie rândul. Dar că mă îndrăgostisem tocmai de fata cu pricina. Deoarece de la fire nu simt atragere decât pentru femeile oacheșe, cât mai oacheșe, și dânsa era bălană și albă până la sebrezime, așa că deși am iubit-o cu patimă, nici o clipă făptura ei, chiar având-o aproape, n-a așteptat între-a mea o bănuială măcar de poftă trupească. Ceea ce a făcut ca tainicul meu simțământ de iubire să se închege a fost numai mila. Când am auzit-o pe Wanda, așa o cheamă, mărturisindu-mi plângând traiul ei chinuit de vitregia nevestei a doua lui taică-so, un polonez bețiv, se înțelege, care ducea de azi pe mâine cu prăsila lui din ce o brumă agonisa cârpind haine și curățând pete, și am aflat că umblau să o vândă. Cum făcuseră și cu o soră ei mai mare, pentru că să o scap, m-am hotărât să trec peste prejudecăți și să o ridic până la mine. Știam ce vâlbă urma să stârnească fapta mea, o știam prea bine, dar nu de judecata celor vii mi-era teamă, ci de acelor morți, cărora nu deopotrivă mă puteam scuti să le dau socoteală și erau nopți înfrigurate de nesomn, când îi vedeam mai evea, înșirați ca în vechile icoane grecești, pe fund de aur roșu și țepeni în caftanele lor de sarasir, pe acei trufași arhonți purtându-și în mâini capetele tăiete. Iar privirile lor, neînduplecate, întorcându-se cu scârbă de la mine, vânzătorul. Să dau înapoi, n-aveam însă tăria și mă lăsam târât în voia soartei. Anul cernit era pe sfârșite, puțin mă mai despărțea de ziua logodnei, poruncisem chiar inele. În dimineața când le aduceam de la Giuvaergiu cu numele noastre săpate, găsi la poartă, pe laviță, păi da, stam încă pe podul de pământ, Calea Plevnei, cum mi se schimbase numele, pe cucoana Elena Sameșului, Una din cele mai de ispavră malhalagioaice, prietene cu mama. Mă aștepta să-mi spuie ceva. A, voi o presimțire. Păi, am poftit-o în casă, a jilit-o întâi pe cucoana Ancuța, dar îndată ce lacrimile i-au dat răgaz, s-a ridicat cu străjnicie împotriva ce pusesem la cale, zicând că aș fi săvârșit mare păcat, chiar dacă Vanda ar fi fost o fată cinstită, necum o târâtură care se întinsese cu toți derbedeii și trecuse pe la Doftoș, pe la Moașa. Am însă încremenit. De nu crezi, maică, adăugă ea. Stai odată noaptea la pândă, după 11, să vezi singur cum își bagă îndrălăuri pe fereastră. Păi să ți-l spun și cine e. Păi Fane al văduvei, zugravul ăla de cântă cu armonica. Mi se puse atunci un jung la inimă, urechile porniră să învâje și se învârti casa cu mine. Eram rănit de moarte. Cum însă, oricât de zguduitoare ar fi împrejurările, nu-mi pierd sărita, judecai și atunci rece. Că înainte să o fi cunoscut, lipsită cum era de pază și de creștere și înconjurată de pilde și de îndemnul rele, greșise. Da, era sângeros pentru mine, nu însă de mirare, dar ca să-și bată în așa hal joc de obrazul meu, păi și cu cine? În ajunul logodnei, asta covârșea orice măsură și nu puteam să-i o iert. Dar mi-am adus aminte că, punând mama odată să-mi ghicească norocul, îmi dase că de toate fericirile am să am în viață parte, numai de dragoste nu.
I needed some time to recover. I hardly left the house. I began to take late walks far outside the city. In the course of these walks, I noticed that when I crossed the Marmizan Bridge, I always saw one unusually beautiful girl. I shortly became apprehensive of missing her, and I was sad when I did. Without my noticing, the hap of seeing her developed into a need, and more emotions accumulated. Day or night, her face arose before my mind. I could not think of the young woman without becoming disturbed. And when I encountered her, I was overwhelmed with a timidity I had not known before, one which prevented me from talking to her for some while. What seemed strange to me in this story was not that I had fallen for someone, my turn had simply come, but that I had fallen for her in particular, since by my nature, I was usually attracted to women with dark skin, as dark as possible, and she was flaxen-haired and pale, almost pallid. So do not be surprised, my friend, if I tell you that although I loved her with passion, her corporality, even from up close, did not awaken the first thought of desire. What ignited my mysterious feeling of love was only pity. When I saw Wanda, that was her name, weep as she described her life, her pains at the hands of her stepmother, her father who was Polish and, she gave to understand, a drunk. How she suffered taking constant care of his brood, patching clothes and cleaning stains, and that when I learned they were planning to traffic her, as they had her older sister, I decided, in order to save her, I would leave prejudice aside and lift her to my level. I knew only too well what gossip would follow my actions. The judgments of the living did not concern me, but the dead demanded my explanation. They returned during frigid nights of insomnia, standing in rows like in old Greek icons, those proud archontes carrying their decapitated heads, turning their disgusted, unyielding gazes away from me, the traitor. I did not have the strength to resist, and I let myself be cast about by the will of fate. My year of mourning was ending. Only a little more remained before the day we would be engaged. I had even ordered the rings. Then, on the morning I was bringing them, engraved with our names, back from the jeweler, who did I find waiting on the bench by the door? I was still living at Podul de Pământ, or Calea Plevne, as the name became. But Cucoana Elenca, wife of the exchequer, one of the most imposing of mother's neighborhood friends, she had something to tell me. I had a premonition. I invited her in. She wept briefly for Cucoana Anicutsa, but as soon as her tears had gone, she vehemently denounced my plans, saying that even were Wanda an honest girl, I would be committing a great sin. But in no case could I proceed with some tartlet who slept with the dregs of society and had already had call for the doctor and the midwife. I was petrified. If you don't believe me, my boy, she added, keep watch one night after 11 and see for yourself how she lets her amaretto in through the window. I can even tell you who it is, Fane, the widow's boy, the painter, the one who plays the harmonium. A stake went through my heart. My ears started to hum and the house spun around me. It was a mortal blow. However calamitous my circumstances seemed, I did not lose my senses. I judged things coolly. The fact that she had made mistakes before I met her, lacking as she did any attention or upbringing, surrounded by bad examples and bad advice, this wounded but did not surprise me. Yet, to mock me in this way, and with this kind of man, on the eve of our engagement, that exceeded any measure, and I could never forgive her. I recall the time I asked my mother to tell my future, and she explained that I would have part of all the happiness life affords, except love. That's great. So now I think after our reading, I'll turn it over to Bogdan.
Oh, just a couple of questions, if you don't mind, as usual. So I was thinking, it's perhaps you could remind us again why this choice in the title. What is the semantics associated with the word rakes?
So, like many questions in this book, I had to address this with some kind of conception of the importance of various features of Matei's language. Archaism is one of them. So I could have chosen something very straightforward like kings of the old court, but I wanted to choose an older word. I wanted to choose a word that had kind of this more meaning, and I also wanted to choose a word that combined the sense of kind of some title, some nobility, and also this idea of decadence. And in a word that is much more common in the 18th century, we have both of those combined. A rake is a kind of a womanizer, but also someone of low nobility, someone from the upper class who uses his money and his influence for, let's call it libertinage. And there's actually a very famous series of engravings by Hogarth called the Rakes Progress. And these are a parody of the 17th century work, the Pilgrims Progress. The Pilgrims Progress is an allegory of the Pilgrims Progress, Christian Pilgrims Progress towards God. And Hogarth makes a parody called the Rakes Progress, in which you see him go from you see the rake go from a elegant dinner to a bar, to a brothel, and he ends up in an insane asylum by the end of it, which one of the characters, Pasha Dia, threatens Pirgu with the insane asylum at one point. So I wanted a word that would have all of these associations for the English language reader, and also point from the very beginning, from the first word of the title, to the importance of archaism in this book.
Thank you for that. And I have the feeling that the language, the literary language of the Rakes, when it was published in 1929, was already archaic. I mean, he was looking for that. He was, you could see in the text there are several strata of language, of historical ages of the Romanian language, and just to give a feeling of how complex the operation of translating this text must have been. I'm going to ask you about a couple of words and the whole theory and the complexity behind the choice. Okay, for example, we have there's a title of a chapter called Cele trei hagialâcuri. Now, what do we do if we have to translate a very rare word that has this Turkish semantics influence, or I mean, we're not using Hajalug, but we do understand what it means.
Yes, no, that's a characteristic problem of this of the text, and yeah, I think I will surprise no one by saying that I found the text difficult to read. I have very sympathetic Romanian friends who asked me, they said, "Oh, you're translating Craii. Are you translating it into Romanian?" I always wanted to read it. So there is the sense that that there's a really elaborate vocabulary that's used, and especially all of these Turkish words, these words with Turkish etymologies, are heavily foregrounded in the text, so that really a lot of the drama of the text, we can even call it the plot of the text, is to see this how the Orient infiltrates even the language in which the events of the book are described. So this was a problem for me as a translator, because obviously the first thing that you do in translation is get rid of all the original words. Although, as Adina mentioned, I did manage to work some of the original words into the text. So my first step was to look for English language words that had Turkish etymologies, and this proved to be very difficult because there's not that many of them. I even consulted with a friend of mine, a very accomplished translator from Turkish into English named Aron Aji, who runs the translation program at the University of Iowa. And I said, "How do you do it? How do you get the Turkishness in your vocabulary in English?" And he said, "You know, Sean, you can only say the word yogurt so many times." So with that anecdote, he gave me permission to abandon the idea of copying Matei's etymologies. And so what I did instead was to look for a similar point of tension in English. I looked for a way of writing English that would also have an etymological tension built into it. I can't do the same etymological tension, but I can do some etymological tension. And with that, I can create something that, at least if it's not the same thing, it is a good match for the original. So this is that was my goal, that make a text that would be a good match for the original and give people some indication of what's happening in the Romanian text. And so this tension that I found was the old tension between Germanic roots and Latin roots in English. Right, yeah. So this is, Borges is famous for saying that the best novels in English are written in German. And what he meant is that he was giving voice to this long-standing preference among speakers of English for the good German roots that would be, simple words like trunk, or something like that, that are root, right? These words that are supposedly older and more authentic for English. But really the interesting thing for me was the period of the 17th and 18th century, where you have this huge translation project that goes on that brings in many, many works from translated from Latin, translated from French, translated from Italian. And this is a revolutionary change for the English language. This is the period that brought us the King James Bible. This is the period that brought us Shakespeare. This is the period that brings us, the period of greatest translation is the period of the masterpieces of English literature. And so when I'm translating the work, my translation of Matei, I'm looking for aggressively Latinate words that foreground their Latinity as a way to create tension with the words, the ordinary words we have in the Germanic roots. And I'll give you one example, just to round off my point. There's a certain moment where Pasha Dia is said to have been Sârgânuit din Țara, when he's for his upbringing. So he's not exilat, he's Sârgânuit. This is another one of these Turkish words like what you brought up, Bogdan. And I could have translated this as exiled. He was exiled to a foreign country for his upbringing. And that's a Latin root, but that doesn't get the tension that I'm looking for, and the tension that I think is appropriate for Matei's text. So instead, I was looking through old texts and old dictionaries of the English language, and I found the word exputed, which shares a root with the word spit, right? So he was exputed from the country for his education. This, I thought, brought it home. So you can imagine how thrilled I was, Bogdan, when you mentioned this in your article that was published today. You mentioned that exact word. I thought, yes, it worked. It worked. Success on that one word, at least. So anyway, so I'm sorry for going on so long about that.
Look,
about
it was
that.
I was reading your version, and I found that word there. I got to that paragraph, and it was like, oh, Sean, you did it again, because it was just beautiful. It was right there in the middle of the paragraph, and it was exactly Matei's aesthetics, right there, the word shining in the text. And I said, I have to quote this in the review somehow. So yeah, yeah. Please, sorry for interrupting you. I had to.
No, that was it. That was the end of my point. I just wanted to give that one example and not just say. And I have to say, right, like this, this collection of us here tonight, all these wonderful bilingual people, is exactly the audience that I would hope would be reading this book and making note of these choices, like you did, Bogdan.
Yeah. So this was the difficult question number one about the words with Turkish origin, but we have like the most difficult part, and that's the part with words that have a Slavonic root, and they carry also this connection with the church terminology. And for example, what do you do when you have to translate Vechernie?
I cross myself and hope for inspiration.
So, I think there are a couple of sentences that are absolutely brilliant. And if we're taking a look, there's something more challenging here, and that's the metric. That's the metric. So, because the metric also has repetitions. And there's this aesthetic question. When is this nice to repeat something, and when it's a bad choice to do it? Perhaps a good answer is, if you have some metric and if it sounds like a poem. Okay, now, these languages are so different that I don't know how to do it, but it's like this. So I'm just going to read two-line sentence. First in the Romanian version for the metric, and then we're going to look at Sean's version. Se făcea că la o curte veche, în paracrisul patimilor rele, cei trei crai, mari egumeni ai tagmei preasenine, slujeau pentru cea din urmă oară, Vechernia, Vechernie mută, Vechernia de apoi. There is a metric. It's like a poem, okay? And then the metric is there. In an old court, in the chapel of evil passions, the three Rakes, great abbots of the most serene rank, celebrated their final service of Vespers, silent Vespers, Vespers of the beyond. That was beautiful. And actually, I feel like Vechernia de apoi is like, it sounds almost better, Vespers of the beyond. Like the end of the sentence is actually climbing towards metaphor that's very well translated. And you had here the massive problem with the Slavonic roots, which are actually associated with the early stages of the Romanian literature, maybe corresponding to the 16th to the 18th century rather than the time when Matei was writing. So how did you work with this?
Well, the principle that I have to follow, and this is a principle I've worked with before, but I'll say that the working on this book pushed my thoughts of translation to their extremes. This book was a challenge that even shook the assumptions I had about translation coming into it. The principle that I have developed was to say that I will be globally faithful to those things that I think are important in Matei's writing. And this means that, if I think that linguistic tension is important, as I already mentioned, and you're giving another example of a kind of linguistic tension, if I think that's important for Matei's writing, then I will look for places where I can do that, where I can perform the tension throughout the text. If I'm globally faithful, I may occasionally be locally unfaithful. I have that permission. There's the word the translation theorists use for this sometimes is compensation. So there's always a moment where we can't do something. We can't do exactly the repetition. I'm glad you like the passage that you quoted, but I could point to you 20 other passages where I couldn't do the repetition that Matei does. Or if I want to do the repetition, I have to change, I have to kind of shade the meaning. I have to alter it a little bit in order to make it, in order to achieve the effect. So if there's all these places where I can't do the thing, where it doesn't match exactly, then I can compensate for that failure. I can compensate for that lack of match someplace else where I can do both. So someplace else I can do a rhyme or a repetition that keeps the meaning, and that will make up for the fact that I couldn't do it in place A. So place B will kind of compensate for this lack of effect in the earlier spot. And overall, globally, when a reader goes through the text, they will get the important picture. And so one of the things that this drove me towards was the antiquated language, the archaic language, that I would find words that, I would translate the phrase as I thought it, as best I could tell what it meant. And then I would go and I would look up alternatives within the Oxford English Dictionary Historical Thesaurus. Some people might not know that this text exists. It's one of the most amazing texts ever produced in the English language, and it's possibly one of the most amazing texts ever produced in any language. In fact, the Oxford English Dictionary was once called by a great modernist critic, Hugh Kenner. He called the Oxford English Dictionary the epic poem of the 19th century. He was using Pound's definition of the epic poem, which is a poem containing history. And the Oxford English Dictionary is a historical dictionary of the English language that doesn't give you the normative definition. It gives you a series of examples. So not what the word means, but what the word has meant over centuries. And this meant that I could follow these words back. I could look up a word like pub or tavern, and I would get a list of 30 words that have meant that over the course of the English language, and I could go back and look for the ones that fulfill this goal. So I would do that even in places sometimes where possibly the remaining word wasn't that antiquated, right? There are some of those words, even in Mate. So even if, but I could do it I could be compensating for another place where I hadn't been able to use an antiquated word, and I could put the antiquated word over in that spot. So the Oxford English Dictionary was amazing for me. I didn't have electronic access to it when I first began the project. You can imagine how thrilled I was when I got a digitized version and I could simply call these things up.
Yeah. And there is always then at the other end of the process is when you have to make a choice for words in English. Take for example, when do you use like sunset and when do you use dusk? Because some of you have to make these choices. And if you have, I wrote a couple of examples, and this is the most poetic I found. Și ne topeam în purpura sfințitului, and we melted into the purple of dusk. Don't go for sunset. I mean, sunset, that would be, it's not a poetic choice. The dusk is, that's the sound, that's the atmosphere, that's the spirit.
Well, yeah, so I can't recreate exactly what I was thinking there, but when you read it out, it seems clear to me that the rhythm of the sentence determines that choice.
Definitely.
Right. So in that case, if you end on sunset, you end on something that's called a feminine ending. This is a obviously misogynistic way of describing these things, but if you end on an unaccented syllable, we call that a feminine ending. If you end on an accented symbol, you call that a masculine ending. And dusk ends on an accented syllable. And so after the purple of dusk gives it a rhythmic finality, the way that sunset does not.
So you're looking at the metric, not at the semantics.
Well, there I'm choosing between two words that are fairly close. There's a big difference between sunset and dusk. We all know this, but there's a bigger difference between sunset and elephant, right? So we're already looking at two words that are fairly close. And this book is about the style, right? This book is, there's the moment in the first passage that we read when the characters turn away from conversation. The narrator says, I would have started conversation if they hadn't begun a waltz. And then we have this long description of the waltz. The characters turn from conversation, turn from characters towards music. They turn towards the aesthetic. And so that's, I think, emblematic for the book as a whole. We get characters, but really the drama of the book is the aesthetics of the language, the decadence, the opulence of the vocabulary, and the heights of the rhetorical power. And so those are the things that are going to take precedence for me over a question of, sunset has several colors and dusk has fewer colors. So I'm going to choose for an image or for a sense of semantics. I'm going to choose everywhere I went through the book, I was looking for music in the first case.
Thank you for saying this. That's why I badly needed this translation in English. Now I can work finally, and I think Adina has a question, or maybe a couple. Let's see. So Adina, please come on, get in.
You're muted. There you go.
I won't keep you too long because it is getting late here in New York, but I do have an important question. And I understand the challenges as a translator of the language part, and that was brilliant. I really appreciate all this explanation. I didn't know about the Oxford dictionary and all these explanations that were so rich, and I learned so much tonight. But the question is, fundamentally, why did you choose this book to translate? Is it just because of these challenges, or is it more to that?
Well, I chose the book a couple of times. That is to say, I chose it first because of the reputation, right? That in 2001, there was a famous poll of 100 literary critics, and they said that this was the best novel in the Romanian language. It's from a period that's my academic specialty. So I write on Romanian and Anglophone modernism already. So I've been reading in the book in that sense, and I knew the context. But then you face problems in getting a project completed. And so I would send out samples and then have it rejected. And I would send out to presses, I would send out to magazines and face a kind of obstacles there, which is normal, which is absolutely normal for anybody who's trying to publish literature. And then I would have to choose, do I really want to keep working at this book or not? The book was turned down by several publishers. It then got a grant from the PEN Translation Fund, PEN-HEIM grant. And that grant was founded by and is named for Michael Henry Heim, the great translator of European literatures. And his last book actually was a translation of Becker. So he did from Romanian as well. A person who was an inspiration to me. So when I got that grant, somehow I felt from Heim himself, and I had to go back into it. And so I had to keep re-choosing this to refinish it. I worked on this, it was over a decade that this book was in process. All these times I had to choose again. And each time I chose because I was more and more entranced by the language. I wanted to see how this drama played out. I wanted to see, this guy is weird. Matei is not your usual guy, right? And these characters are not your usual people. And I became just more and more fascinated with this. And the darker it became, the more I was sucked in. And yeah, this book, I had to choose I had to affirm my choice. I had to ratify my choice over and over again. And I'll tell you how long it took me. I looked back at the early emails, and I was apologizing to one editor for being late in sending him the text that I had promised him. And my excuse was that my daughter had just been born, my second daughter. Well, the day that the book came out, the day that I got the book in my hand, was the day that she started the 6th grade, that she rode off on her bike towards her middle school. And so that's how long I've been working on this book, is that a child was born and grown and now has finished elementary school and is going to middle school. But in each case, I was, sorry, I'm just laughing because that story I'm sincere, it seems so wholesome for a book that's so twisted, right? But anyway, I had to reaffirm my choices over those 10 years, more than 10 years. And each time I was more and more entranced and more sucked into the book, until eventually the last stages of finishing the manuscript were utterly insane concentration over the period of a couple of weeks.
You chose well. So I'm level of the white wine now here.
I'm still on water, but I'll make it rain by reciprocating.
Well, thank you so much. It was such a joy to hear you talking. It was such a joy to read the book. I encourage everyone to get a copy of the book. It's available on Amazon, Bogdan, I think. There are
everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
So I mean, the time is more than we anticipated, but I'm going to have one last question because it might be that
I'm here all night. This is where I live actually, so I don't have anywhere to go.
Same here. I mean, we can keep going overnight, no problem. I don't have classes tomorrow. So the question is this: just imagine that. I mean, I'm sure that exists. That we have a class, a course. It could be upper undergrad level or maybe graduate level on modernist literature, maybe European, if somebody wants to focus. And my secret dream is to see your version of Mateiu Caragiale's Rakes discussed actually in classroom. And here the question is like twofold. First, where would you see like this important work of Romanian culture situated? Like, would you compare it with, let's say, with the modernist Czechs or somewhere related to the Polish modernism? Where does this belong? Question number one. And secondly, you're teaching writing classes, and what could like a scholar interested in writing learn from Matei's craft?
Those are great questions. I actually have already included this work in a class on modernism for undergraduates. I mean, I think that it's a work like many Romanians at that time. They saw themselves working on questions of the nation, and the question was a choice between the East and the West. And in Matei, we have this overwhelming presence of the East, the gates of the Orient. But the West that they feel is not the Polish and not the Czech. It's French. It's the capital of the 19th century, right? So I think that when we know that Matei, for example, kept a diary in French, and he says in this diary that it's written only for him, and yet he's not writing it in Romanian. He's writing it only for himself in French. So this is a work that wants to leap into the world. And I put him next to Whitman, right, Arebur. I put him next to Oscar Wilde, for sure. I put him next to Poe, Edgar Allan Poe, especially Poe as filtered through Charles Baudelaire. So this, all of this decadent atmosphere, I think there's it's a strong combination, a strong contribution to that. What is different here, I think, what the difference that Matei brings to the question of decadence is that he is, it's a decadence of life or death, right? That the narrator, when he wakes up, says he couldn't move even if the house was on fire. That's how hungover he is on the first pages of the book, before the passage that we read tonight. So there's this idea that his decadence is so overwhelming that the house around him could burn and he still would go up with the flames. This isn't some kind of light decadence, right? This isn't something, this kind of cigarette smoking cafe decadence that you get in Oscar Wilde, whom I love, right? This is a question of mortality. It's also the question of the life and death of the idea of a Romanian nation for Matei. So that's, I think, something that it contributes that we don't usually have. Your second question about workshops or what a writer might learn from reading Matei. I mean, I hope that a writer reading the English version would learn two things. One, that I've done something worthy of their attention in terms of music. I hope that the music provides some kind of example for that. And I hope that the music that unites the descriptions of something elevated and the descriptions of something base. That even when we're talking about prostitutes, I hope that the music comes across and gives a kind of a richness to the English language text. The second thing that I hope would happen for your average American writer is that that person would be inspired to learn Romanian. That person would be inspired to say, what could possibly have motivated the translator to write this kind of English? I expect them to think that I might have needed some kind of mental health intervention, right, in order to have tried down this task. And so I hope that by presenting this version of Matei, that people become more interested in the original Romanian text, and then they will learn Romanian, or at the very least, they'll have some idea that other things happen in other languages, and that writers from the United States will learn foreign languages and proceed to learn more from those other literatures.
Sean, thank you so much for this. I think this is an act of literary courage and bravery, and you've done it, an amazing translation. I think I could listen all night, and I think we should get together at some point and talk about these issues in person.
That would be a pleasure.
I would like to open the mic to our guests from the audience. If there's anyone who would like to ask Sean a question, I think we have a few more minutes. I will start quickly with a small question. Mateiu has a poetic language in the sense that it's lyric, but also it's Poe-like, right? It has a mysterious aura to it that can be understood coming from that space of Romanian life and history. I think it's very hard for an outsider to fully grasp that. And this is true for any work of translation, right? You are unable to reach that meta level. How do you grasp that? What is your attempt in capturing some of that layer of history and feeling for a Romanian reader that you can translate into English?
I find it helpful to remember the words that Dante said were written over the gates of hell. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. So I think that's a good motto for a lot of translation activity. I'm being a little facetious. Translating is not hell. But the idea that we're going to abandon the hope of being a perfect reader of the work, I think that's important. And I think it's, and that my reading is always going to be different than a well-informed Romanian reader's. That's always going to be true. Even though I've spent, I first went to Romania in 1994, and I've been studying and researching Romanian literature ever since. I still have much to learn, and my perspective is always the perspective of an American from Mississippi. So that's not something I'm going to overcome. That's okay, right? That's okay. I think instead, I listen as best I can. I listen in particular, well, there's two things I want to say. One is that I listen a lot. And I also, I listen in particular to, actors like Tudor that was read so beautifully before. I listen to the actors in the movie reading these same lines, and those cadences help me understand the Romanian situation. That's the first thing. The second thing to say is that Romanian culture is not an isolated culture. Romanian culture went through a period of isolation under communism for sure, but it's not an isolated culture. Romanian culture is always a cosmopolitan culture in which you have many different influences coming in the way that Adina was mentioning at the very beginning of our session this evening, the way also that Emma Grama in her article published today alongside Bogdan's also does an excellent job of explaining the multitudinous nature of Romanian culture, so that you have a writer who lives in like Matei, who lives in Berlin and writes in French to himself. He's a great emblem, with all his preoccupation with Romania, he's a great emblem of the cosmopolitan nature of Romania. In that sense, Romanian culture is open even to somebody like myself from Mississippi. That's where I get my hope.
That's a brilliant answer. Thank you for that. I am astonished that it took so long for someone to finally tackle this piece of art, but I'm glad you're the first one. Yeah, you may be the best one ever.
I'm not the first one though. There's a what's his Constantin Baciu did a version in English, and then Alistair Ian Blythe translated the first section. He called it the Old Court Philanderers. Philanderer is a great word for these types of womenizers. This is the so yeah. I'm sorry. I don't mean to have false modesty, but the first translation of the work was into French in 1961, and that's a version that I consulted also as I was working on my work. But anyway, I'm glad that it's very pleasing for me to hear your appreciation.
I stand corrected. So from the audience now, who would like to ask a question or two to Dr. Sean Cotter?
I'd like to say something. I wanted to congratulate the translator. It was a pleasure to listen to Romanian and English cultures so gracefully blended. I worked on translations and the theory of translation, and I must say that there are mysteries that can only be transcribed, which sometimes could be radically inaccurate or very impossible to paraphrase. But I remember George Steiner, I read the Tower of Babel, and he said that both the first attempt of translation and the many subsequent ones can lead to failure, or they can lead to an incredible mystery. So I want to congratulate the translator. Maybe the fact that someone also writes can lead to such a deep and multifaceted understanding of a different culture. So the first fragment, when I listened to Tudor and then I listened to the English version, I think they gracefully blended together, and it was a pleasure to actually jump from one culture to the next and see that they embraced so harmoniously. So I really look forward to reading the English translation, and thank you again for this this very, very successful event.
Hi, Sean. How's it going? This is Paul Dormugur here. It's really a pleasure to meet you virtually like this. And I'd like to ask you, in terms of your translation that you did so far, you translated Romanian poetry, you translated Nikita Stănescu, you translated Cărtărescu, and now you translated Craii de Curtea-Veche. My question is, in your relationship to Romanian language, there is also, of course, your own evolution. And can you talk a little about all these different choices that you had, going from, the classical 11 elegies of Nikita Stănescu to Viitor of Cărtărescu, and now to Craii de Curtea-Veche? Thank you very much.
So the evolution of my understanding of Romanian, is that what you asked for? Or I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand.
Not so much the understanding of Romanian, but I see translation as an act of resonance, and your soul is put into tune with certain aspects of Romanian artists. So you translate somebody, but in fact you're reinventing in English that individual. So the translator is a creator also. So basically, by translating all this artwork, you're really creating. So I was curious to see, to hear you, as a translator / creator, how do you see this evolution?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. And both you and as Madalina mentioned, are using images of harmony or resonance or these kind of sound images, and I find those very appropriate for the description of translation. That when I'm working, I've called translation an art of dissonance. That you're always you have these two texts that are both beautiful and musical, you hope, and when they come together, you have a sound that's created between them. There's a very famous essay by Walter Benjamin from 1923 on translation, and he compares translation to the harmonics that you get when you play one note with one instrument, one note with a second instrument, and there's a third note that appears sometimes when the harmonics are correct, and that's what he sees as the work of translation. So yes, I can give you a very personal example of the way this resonance works for me. My relationship with various authors and various texts has been always different. I've become friends with some of the authors, I've become friends with Ileana Orlich, with Nikita Danilov. I have professional relationships with some of the authors, like I do with Dumitrescu, and then with Matei, obviously we didn't have the chance to meet. When these images of the authors, though, that I have developed stay with me as I'm translating, and I try to almost imagine them speaking, as my work is coming out. Imagine their attitudes, their postures of their body, the way they might pick up their phone, the way they might pause, all the things that we saw beautifully displayed in Tudor's reading, for example. All those things are important to me as I'm translating. That's why one of the my favorite words in Romanian is da, because when I hear that word, I know I'm supposed to say door, or I'm supposed to say something much more sophisticated, but for me, the word da, it brings an entire attitude to my mind of someone kind of pausing and expressing suspicion or whatever it is they're expressing. I see the picture. So sometimes this resonance gets very, very complicated. There was one time when I was working on Viitorul that I was working, I was kind of compressed. My time was short for that project, shorter than I would have liked. So I was working very intensely. And if you've read the book, you know that it's a very intense book. And has all of these, a large part of it takes place within a room that's in the shape of a sphere. And then eventually it turns out to be an eyeball, and the eyeball opens, there's a crack and the light pours through. One of the days that I was working, since I needed to keep myself with some variety, I'd taken my computer and I was working in a library nearby, a very beautiful building. And I was typing away. And as I was typing, I looked up and I realized that the room I was in had a cupola, and it was a very large round room. And that there are these windows in the cupola where the sun was streaming in, and the shaft of the sunlight came and it was hitting exactly on my table. And so I suddenly realized that I was translating inside of the eyeball. I was translating about the eyeball from within the eyeball, and that same crack of overwhelming light was coming down on me at that moment. And that much resonance between my experience and the text was overwhelming. I simply saw what was happening and I shut my computer and I left. And I didn't translate any more that day.
That's an amazing story. It's really, illuminating this story for us. Thank you very much for sharing it.
Illumination was exactly what it's about. Yeah.
We're getting close to our meeting limit. And Sean, I have to tell you, it's fascinating. And I think this effort and this result deserves hours of discussions. I hope we can do this again in person at some point after people have had the chance to read the translation and be a little bit more in tune with your amazing work of art. I want to thank you for giving us this opportunity to know about your process and your thoughts. And I want to also thank the participants, Cosmin Dumitrescu, Adina Dabija, Bogdan Suceava, Tudor Petrut, and Jim Rosapepe and Ileana Orlich. I wish you only the best, and I'm so happy that you came to us tonight. That was quite amazing.
I thank you from the depths of my heart. This has been a great pleasure, and everyone's attention and questions and thoughts for this have been very stimulating for me. I've had a great time. And yes, I would love to do this again in person.